The papacy is controlled by some local Italian families there in and around Rome.
Yeah.
It gets sordid. That they go back and tell Vladimir how awesome it is, and also, perhaps they say, and he's got a good-looking sister. Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you again to another episode of the Uncensored Pilgrims. I'm Marty McLain, along with the irrepressible
Paul Price.
Paul, it's good to be back talking about church history. It's a very enjoyable subject. I don't know about you, but I'm learning a lot.
It's a subject about which there's a whole lot of division in there, just like there is in the church in general.
You can see how things developed, and you can see why we have problems today.
Yes.
And you see the origin of it, and of course there was an origin, as we discussed
yes,
in
the
a previous.
origin was the origin.
Origin was the origin of a lot of stuff.
A lot of problems.
Yes. But anyway,
we're going to an odd character, for
yes,
sure.
We go back and listen to previous episode of when we covered the history of Origen, a very interesting individual. But today we're going to deal with the 9th and 10th century of church history. And, this is the time where things kind of get a little bit weird in my book. They start kind of devolving, really in a pretty substantial
more rapid way. Huh?
In a very rapid way. When you see how the political powers start to manipulate the papacy and how the papacy receives what they are given and they want more, and then it gets very corrupt, and especially when the Carolingian dynasty starts to collapse and the papacy is controlled by some local Italian families there in and around Rome.
Yeah,
it gets sordid.
That's bad.
It gets nasty.
Now, what do you think? I think it's pretty obvious by this point. The church in Rome has already begun teaching a false gospel of works salvation.
I think when one of the previous popes, I can't remember if it was Pope Gregory who it was, that basically said, well, with some sins it does require penance in order to be forgiven. I think that was Gregory. I'm not sure, but then we saw that you.
What do you remember? What century he was in?
He was in the 6th, maybe. Yeah. I cannot remember. But then you had one of the guys coming up with the supposed doctrine of purgatory.
Yeah.
And
so by the time you get there, you've left salvation by grace alone through faith alone, in the dust.
And you can see how the time of persecution really purified the church, and they really seemed to want to do what was right, and they were really about the right stuff. But then when the affluency came, when they were endorsed by the Roman emperor, and then when they became the preferred religion of the empire, they started to get bigger. They were well protected, and you had people that would join the church or want to be a part of the church for advancement.
Yeah.
And, it was one of the only segments of society as the years went by where you could really start out really low and get to kind of a high point.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture here of Pope Gregory. He actually died 604 AD. Okay. Obviously, we talked about him in a previous episode. But
yes.
I think if this picture that I see here is anything remotely accurate, anybody who dresses like that, long crimson flowing robes with a tall egg-shaped crown-type hat on their head.
Had a little sizzle.
Yeah. If you're dressing like that, that's a real big clue as to what type of place you're putting yourself.
Yeah, you kind of live in large.
That's not a place of humility at all, is it?
You wouldn't think so. I mean, maybe they just felt like sometimes they had to dress the part.
If you dress like a king, you probably think you are a king.
Yeah, and when they got the Papal States, they actually ruled over a certain segment of Italy itself. So they became not only a religious leader, but also I don't want to say a secular ruler, but they were a ruler as well as a religious leader.
I think a tough thing for us Christians looking at our own history is that, and I think God allows this for a reason. I think He allows the church to look bad for the same reason He allowed the Jews to look bad, because the message of history is that we can't do it on our own. We need God, right?
Yes.
And even when God does everything God is supposed to do, we still just manage to mess it up one way or another.
It tends to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so it's something that skeptics will hit you with is, well, if Jesus started the one true church and the Bible is true, then why did the Christian church go so bad so quickly?
Yeah. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with people. Even though
He allows
truly
us to
redeemed have been redeemed, you still have a fallen nature, and you still have even redeemed people do things they ought not to do. And there's a lot of people who are in the church that aren't redeemed, that are not really truly saved.
And I do believe God always keeps a remnant for himself. So even as we're seeing in these centuries, as the church gets worse and worse, there's a remnant there that is true to God, and eventually things will get so bad that they will break away and create a new church that is at least trying once again to be faithful to the Scriptures.
Yeah.
Once we get there.
Well, here's what we got here today. We're going to talk about the 8 and 900s, which would be the 9th and 10th century of church history. I want to talk about Cyril and Methodius. These were two brothers. Their names were originally Constantine and Michael. In 862 A.D., they were sent by the Byzantine Emperor Michael III to Moravia, which is modern-day Czech Republic. It was at the request of a Moravian prince named Radislav. Now, their father, Constantine and Michael, who became Cyril and Methodius, they're from a very influential family. Their father was a high-ranking military official in the Byzantine Empire. And now here they are being sent as missionaries to the Slavs. While they're there, they develop an alphabet, and they translate the liturgy into the Slavonic language. Now, the bishops and clergy of the Roman Church said that the liturgy should only be in the holy languages, which were Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, not the common languages. So unfortunately for these two guys, they get caught in the crosshairs of the East-West power struggle. You had German Archbishop of Salzburg insisting that the liturgy only be performed in Latin and not in the Slavonic language. So they wound up in Rome with Pope Adrian II. They conversed about the situation, and he sided with them, and they were sent back to the Slavs. However, they had to agree for their mission to be under the authority of the Pope, and unfortunately, before they returned, Cyril died, so Methodius went by himself. And then there's another political change of power, and Methodius' use of the Slavonic liturgy was once again seen as trying to take power over the bishops sent by Rome. He's accused of, quote, scandalous use of the Slavonic language.
Scandalous.
Yes. Eventually, under a new pope, it was deemed inappropriate to use the liturgy in the Slavonic language.
I think they call that language nowadays, they call it Old Church Slavonic.
They call it, okay.
It's like the parent language that gave birth to the modern Russian language.
Right. And we're going to see how this goes over toward the east. However, their efforts to communicate the gospel and the liturgy in the Slavonic language did bear lasting fruit, but it's only after their deaths. Here's what one writer says, quote, the Slavonic liturgy and Bible made their way all over Eastern Europe and gave birth to the Bulgarian and the Serbian Orthodox churches, which still use the Slavonic language. Russia, which converted to Orthodoxy about a century after Methodius died, continues to use his Cyrillic alphabet to this day.
Have you ever studied that Cyrillic alphabet?
No, but I used to see it on the back of the USSR hockey team.
Yes, and do you know what USSR is in the Cyrillic alphabet?
I used to know CCCP, right?
Yeah, it looks like CCCP to us.
Yes.
It's actually SSSR.
Okay.
Or SSSR.
Yeah.
So,
but you look at
Soyuz, Sovietsky, something or other, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That's what that stands for.
Yeah, when they played, I think it was originally in 1980 when they, I think USA went against them in hockey.
Uh-huh.
And, it's the Miracle on Ice. I don't know if you remember that.
Vaguely.
Okay. You weren't even a zygote in 1980, were you?
No.
Okay.
No, I was nothing in 1980.
You were nothing.
Unless origin is right, and then maybe
you were not pre-existing.
Then maybe I was existing in heaven. No. I don't know.
No, so you're not even being a zygote. Anyway, I can remember the hockey players, they would have CCP on the back. Yeah. And as a boy, I'd look at it and think, they're USSR, but their shirts say CCCP.
Yeah. It gets confusing. That whole alphabet is really from the Bible. I mean, it's very heavily based on the Greek alphabet. That's
Okay.
where the inspiration for it comes from. So a lot of the letters in shouldn't say Russian, I should say the Cyrillic alphabet, a lot of those letters are just really similar, both in how they appear and also the sound that they make, just compared to the
And that
Koine
would
Greek
make,
alphabet from
you
the
know,
Bible.
since as Cyril and Methodius were trying to take obviously the Greek and put it into
Yes.
the.
So they just kind of did a little riff off of the Greek alphabet to create a new one.
Well, here's what happens after the followers of Cyril and Methodius, is after they died, after their followers were forced out of Moravia, they went to Bulgaria. And the Bulgarian prince Boris, who had been defeated by the Eastern Empire in 863 AD, he had to, as part of the conditions for peace, convert to Christianity along with his people. Now, many of his people resisted the forced conversion to Christianity, and he sought the counsel of the Patriarch of the Eastern Church. At the time, the Eastern and Western churches argued over who had jurisdiction over the newly evangelized Balkan churches. However, there was a problem. He wanted to have a church that was independent of Constantinople. Now, eventually, he gets this arrangement, and it's called an autocephalous arrangement, where you have self-appointed clergy without answering to a higher authority. Many of his people eventually converted to Christianity, and the followers of Cyril and Methodius adapted the alphabet to the Bulgarian language, and they preached and worshipped in the Bulgarian tongue. Now, it's noted, as you mentioned, to this day, Cyrillic is the alphabet used in Southeast Europe and in Russia. So, and then in 917, the Bulgarian church would separate from both Rome and Constantinople. So, why, Paul, would you think that they would be resistant to having the liturgy in the common language? Did that later become a source of control over the people?
Definitely.
Because what we'll see in the centuries to follow is that people who actually wanted to translate the Bible in the native tongue of the people, it didn't go so well with them.
No, they were persecuted. A lot of them were killed.
Yeah.
And the whole argument from the Catholic Church at the time was, and of course now they've gone back on this, now that they lost that battle, so now they've gone back on this, and they would never say something like this today. But what they said at the time was, allowing the Bible to be translated into the common language is like throwing pearls before swine. That's what they said. They said it was, the common people were not spiritual enough and not refined enough and not educated enough to properly interpret the scriptures. They needed the church to interpret them. And if they needed the church to interpret them, why not just leave it all in the hands of the church? Don't even let them read it, because they'll just mess it up.
Yeah.
That was their attitude. It was a method of control and power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really, I think it's demonic. Ultimately,
yeah. I mean,
Satan doesn't want people to read the
man.
word.
That's how you grow.
Yeah.
Well, that's what was happening down there in that part of Europe, in the eastern part. You also had the Photian schism. The eastern and western churches obviously had some profound differences. In the east, the priests could marry, but in the west, they could not. The east, they used leavened bread in communion, and the west used unleavened bread. The east tended to compromise doctrinally with the politically power Arian and monophysite churches. One historian has described the structure that the Eastern Church eventually morphed into as, quote, the Byzantine ideal was a series of autocephalous state churches linked by inner communion and the faith of the seven councils. So they had a different affiliation than the churches over in the West that were associated with Rome and with the Pope, with the Roman Church. The churches also argued over the Filioque statement in the Nicene Creed. Now, this statement says that the Holy Spirit also proceeds from the Son as well as the Father. The Eastern Church said no addition could be made to a creed without an ecumenical council. And what had happened is that the Western Church had added that one word to the Nicene Creed, and the Eastern Church said, hey, we didn't agree to that. That has to be an ecumenical council for us to put that in there. But the Western Church said, hey, we're going to put it in there. Anyway, and here comes the kicker, Paul. 867 A.D., the Patriarch Photius of Constantinople and Pope Nicholas I, they excommunicate one another over who would control the Slavic states. Quote, Photius charged that the Roman Church was heretical and indoctrinal, in doctrine and in practice, particularly in amending one of the ancient creeds without calling a universal council to discuss the matter. That's from Robert Baker's book on church history. Rome had unilaterally changed one word of the Nicene Creed without the approval of the Eastern Church. Now, at one point, the Pope offered to delete the one word to the creed on the condition that the Eastern Church accept that the Pope in Rome has absolute authority over all the churches in the world. The Patriarch in the East said no.
So he tried to wheel and deal using creeds as a bargaining chip.
Huh? Yeah, I will change the one word if you say that I'm your daddy.
Yeah.
Pope, so, right?
Yeah, we can already see somebody behaving that way is obviously a false leader at that point.
Yeah, if you're willing to say, all right, the creed's obviously important, and this word's very, very important, but we'll take it out if you'll say
in exchange for a favor.
Yeah, if you'll say that I'm the head of all the churches.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
It makes zero sense at all. So eventually, in 1054, we'll see this next time. There will be the great irreversible schism between the East and the West. So you can see that there are all these conditions that are taking place that put them at odds with one another. From the priests, from the bread used in communion, to the Nicene Creed, to how they're affiliated with one another, who's got say-so over who. And eventually there will be an irreversible schism that will happen in 1054 AD. So that's kind of what's happening in the East. That's what's happening between the empires. Now we're going to look at some of the more specific areas in Europe at this time. We're going to go to England. Okay, King Alfred lived from 849 to 899. In England at this time, they were experiencing the invasion of the Norsemen, who were also known as the
Vikings.
The Vikings. They would continue to be a menace until 1066 AD. Now, the first victims of the Vikings, although they had another incursion where they killed some monks, but
the Vikings didn't really go around wearing horn hats.
Really?
Did you know that?
No.
That was That was some kind of
who did?
A fantasy.
Nobody?
I don't know. Maybe nobody. It might have just been a fictional thing that somebody
looks good,
looked
man.
good. Yeah.
Okay. No horn hats. Well, what we have is we have all these Vikings. They show up with no horn hats at the monastery at Lindisfarne, and in 793. At this time, Lindisfarne was considered a great place of importance in cultural matters. And when they show up, the Vikings, they kill the monks, they burn the place, they trash the place. It's so bad that the great scholar Alcuin said, quote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain. Behold, the church of St. Cuthbert splattered with the blood of God's priests, robbed of its ornaments." So they stole from the church, they burned places, they killed the monks. And usually, at first, when they would attack, they would rape, pillage, and plunder, and they'd leave. However, they got to liking everything. They got to liking the place.
They were wondering, could we maybe find some horn hats around here?
Maybe we can build some horn hats and some houses here.
According to Wikipedia, there is no evidence that Viking helmets had horns. The depiction of these horned helmets as historical is a fallacy that began in the 1870s.
Paul just ended that.
So
if your child has a Viking helmet with horns on it, it's wrong.
It's wrong, yeah.
Okay, so get rid of it.
Yeah, it's bad education.
And Paul, did you know that the Vikings actually founded Dublin, Ireland in 852 AD? It's actually a Viking city?
I did, but only because you told me on Wednesday
There
night.
we go. So you did know prior to this podcast. Okay, here's something else that happened. 865 to 878, England was invaded by what became known as the Great Heathen Army. This army, they made short work of the kingdoms of East Anglia and Northumbria, and there's only one kingdom standing in the way. It's the kingdom of Wessex. It's ruled by Alfred. So in 871 and 878, Alfred is able to score these huge victories against the Vikings, and it results in splitting the country between Alfred's kingdom and the kingdom of the Vikings known as the Norse Danelaw. They had a treaty. It was called the Treaty of Wedmore. It required that the Viking Guthrum, that he would submit to baptism, become a Christian. Also, Alfred would serve as his godfather, and Guthrum would have to change his name to Aethelstan.
Aethelstan.
I mean, you go from a really tough Viking name, I'm Guthrum, to Aethelstan. that's just the conditions for you get this land, but you got to, I'll be your godfather, and we're going to change your name, and it's going to be Athelstan. And that's what happened. The Vikings are starting to get introduced to Christianity. And Alfred was a good guy, good king. I mean, he built forts, built a navy. He translated parts of the Bible into English. But, they had to make some concessions with the Vikings and, we'll give you this land and you're going to become Christians. You're going to have a Christian name and I'll be a godfather. So it seemed to work out pretty good.
These people we're talking about here, these Saxons and Anglo-Saxons, these are the people that are the inspiration if you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings movies like I am. They are the inspiration for the people of Rohan.
Really?
If you know who those people are, the horse riding.
Horse guys,
Yeah, they're based on, and their language is based on these Anglo-Saxons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they obviously, you had a clashing of cultures and then a meshing, in some way of the cultures. So that's how the English dealt with the Vikings. Now, how are the French going to deal with the Vikings? Well, there's a guy named Rollo. He's been part of the Viking army that laid siege to Paris in 886. Now, one historian says of Rollo,
no connection to the candy.
No. You cannot roll a Rollo to your pal. You cannot roll a Rollo to your gal. It's chocolate-covered caramel. Not that Rollo. Now, one historian says that Rollo, that he was, quote, trained in the art of war, and he was utterly ruthless. We know he's a violent man, but he was also an incredible negotiator. After years of the Vikings raiding and plundering the French countryside, the people would plead with their king to secure their safety, quote, if not by arms, then by counsel. So in 911 AD, at a place called St. Clair-sur-Epte, and I'm sure I pronounced that correctly, Charles the Simple, king of the West Francia, he and Rollo agreed to a pact of, quote, love and inextricable friendship. Rollo would be given the king's daughter Gisela to wed in exchange for converting to Christianity and promising not to raid the area anymore. Rollo and all his men had to convert to Christianity and be baptized. Rollo would have to change his name to Robert.
Yes.
Additionally, Rollo was given the land that would be known as Normandy. So for the deal to be ratified, Rollo had to swear to the king, had to swear allegiance to the king, and what they did is he'd have to put his hands in the king's hands and swear allegiance to him, and then he'd have to bow, and he'd have to kiss the king's foot. Now, Rollo said, I'm not going to bow before any man, and I will not kiss another man's foot. So that there was a sticking point there. So what they decided to do is they were going to get one of Rollo's men to actually do this on his behalf. Yeah. So to bow and kiss the king's foot. So when it came time to kiss the king's foot, they said that the guy who had been designated to stand in Rollo's place reaches down, picks up the king's foot, yanks it out from underneath him, and brings it to his mouth and kisses it and knocks the king on his back. And all the Vikings laugh. They think it's a big deal. And so technically, they did what was required. And one historian, I like what he puts. He said, quote, the Normans were to remain a disrespectful thorn in the side of the French monarchy for another 3 centuries.
Now, when Rollo saw that, I imagine he thought, hey, I didn't know he was going to do that. I wish I would have done that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good deal. Rollo's like, I'm not going to bow to you. I'm not going to kiss your foot, but I get a guy to do it for me. When the guy does it for him, he yanks the foot out from underneath the king. The king, Charles the Simple, Chucky, falls back on his backside, and
And apparently he just took that. Like he just.
What are you going to do?
Well, if he were Rollo, what do you think Rollo would have done?
Rollo would have come up swinging.
Yeah.
But Charles the Simple, he's called the Simple for a reason, I would imagine. Okay, so that's what was going on. That's how the French dealt with their deals. So anyway, now let's go back toward the east a little bit. There's a guy named Vladimir. He lives from 858 to 1015 AD. Now here we're going to set a stage here. Basil II is the ruler of the Byzantine Empire. In 989 AD, he needs help. He needs military help. So he turns to Vladimir I, who at the time was the Grand Prince of Kiev. Vladimir is not a good man. Some say he had 4, some say 5 wives, and we know that most everybody says he has about 800 concubines.
Wow.
So Basil is the emperor. He needs help.
That's King Solomon level.
That's Solomonic.
Solomonic.
It really is. So Basil wants help. And so he offers Vladimir his sister Anna in marriage in exchange for military help. So think about this. You know the guy has 4 wives and he has 800 concubines, and you want to make a deal with him, so you're going to offer him your sister, Anna.
I guess you think, well, he must really like women, so...
But what do you think Anna said? All I can think, she just probably said, bruh,
Yeah. It was a different time.
They
didn't have, what do you call it? Women's suffrage, women's empowerment. They didn't have any of that back then, did they?
It was definitely
I don't think it mattered what
a
she
different
said.
time. Now, there's another account of what happened. It says that Vladimir wanted to unite his people around a common religion, so he sends out his ambassadors. They explore Judaism, Islam, Roman Christianity, Orthodox Christianity. And they say that when his ambassadors went to Constantinople and they're worshiping in the Hagia Sophia, the big ornate church there, and it's such a beautiful environment, and they're just overwhelmed and overcome with the awe and the beauty of their worship, that they go back and tell Vladimir how awesome it is, and also perhaps they said, and he's got a good looking sister. So anyway, long story short, if Vladimir wants to marry Anna, he's got to convert to Christianity. So in 988 AD, he converts, gets baptized, and he takes the Christian name of Basil.
Yes.
So he has to change his name to the guy who's given him his sister for marriage. Yeah. And it's in deference to his soon-to-be brother-in-law. Then he and Anna, they're married on 989 AD. And after the wedding, he tells all his people they got to be baptized at the Dnieper River, or else they would be considered enemies of the state. And they do say, here's the thing about Vladimir, or as you call him, Vlad. He puts away his wives. They say his other wives. He destroys the pagan temples. He builds churches. And from what I could tell, he might have actually gotten saved. He might have actually taken it serious. I don't know, Paul.
We can't know.
We do know that there's some drastic changes happening in a man's. Your name's Vladimir. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Basil's a little bit better.
Yeah.
I mean, is basil? What is basil?
Oh, other than the herb, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, he goes from this voracious Vladimir to Basil the herb.
Yeah.
So anyway, they say that when he dies, I read one account that says he gives all his money away to the poor. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it makes a good story.
Yeah.
But here's what they do say happened to him when he dies, is that they cut his body up in pieces and distribute it throughout the country to the churches and the monasteries to serve as relics.
Huh.
Would you take some of Vlad?
No.
I mean, did they send it in formaldehyde, or did they salt it?
You can be sure they didn't have formaldehyde.
How would you preserve it back then?
The only way they would have had, to my knowledge,
put some salt on it?
Would have been drying.
Okay. They dried them out?
I guess.
They cut them up and dried them out?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what they did. They didn't have formaldehyde. I'm pretty sure of that.
I mean, do you find out a little bit? I mean, you open up the church mail and there's a couple of fingers? What do you do?
I don't know. The Russians held on to this because they did the same thing to Lenin. Only they did use formaldehyde.
Wait, did they cut? No, they just preserved. They dipped him in it, right? I mean,
they kept the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things from Russia with love, right?
Yeah, but I mean, obviously the Russians didn't come up with the idea of doing relics. Unfortunately, that goes way back, but it's definitely not biblical. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I don't want to be cut up and sent places.
Yeah, well, you won't be. You'll be out of there.
I want to be in a just put me in a casket. I don't really want to be. I saw an episode when I was a boy, The Rockford Files. I think it was The Rockford Files. James Garner.
Yeah, they still play that on broadcast TV.
Somebody tried to put him in a crematorium
Before he died.
Yeah, they tried to burn him. And I remember watching that and him barely getting out of there, and I think,
yeah,
I don't. Even if I am dead, just bury me, man. Just.
You know what
I've
said? I've said just throw me in the trash. But I've been told that's not legal.
Yeah,
so.
Well, I had one church I pastored. We had a deacon there, and he told me, well, his wife said that he always told her that when he dies to just put him in the large animal disposal at the county landfill. That's,
pretty sure that's not legal either.
No, but it's like one of the seminary professors I had. One of the things he said when he died, you go down there and look at his body. Remember, that's just a shell. The real nut's gone.
Yeah, and biblically, I don't find anything much in the Bible about burial or cremation or anything. It doesn't really talk about it.
But you don't want to be cut up in pieces and sent places.
No.
I just don't know. I wonder if he knew that before he died. I wonder if they said, now, Basil.
Yeah.
You're about to pass on, and we're going to cut you up, and you're going to be a relic.
Yeah.
You're going to be a relic from the past.
Yeah.
And you're going to be sent all throughout the nation. I mean, do you tell him? Do you tell him before he dies?
I doubt it. No, I
don't think you do. I think you just, you do it after he passes.
Yeah. It's more it's more considerate to just not mention it. Yeah.
Anyway,
if somebody's going to do that to me, don't mention it. Yeah.
All right. So now that's what's happening up in Russia. Vlad and Olga are considered the founders of Christianity in Russia, and we just had a conversation prior to our podcast here. Tucker Carlson just interviewed Putin, Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin was talking about Vladimir and his conversion to Christianity.
Yes,
during the interview, which I thought, hey, we just learned about it, and here it is.
Yeah. He's very historically versed.
Yeah, he was kind of impressive, but he's still former KGBer.
Yes.
You just always have to bear that in mind.
Yeah, you do have to bear it in mind for sure. Everything he says is for a specific calculated reason.
He's got an angle, man.
Yeah.
He's working it. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about King Otto, who lived from 912 to 937 AD. The Carolingian dynasty, it dissolves around 880 AD. That's the one that was started by Charles the Hammer Martel, Pippin the Short, but mainly by Charlemagne.
Yes.
And it collapses around 880 AD. It's kind of still, but it's just really weak. In its place arose feudal kingdoms that would be ruled by nobles. Eventually, there would be a German who would step up and begin the process of forming a lasting dynasty. His name was Henry I in 918 AD. He becomes the first non-Frankish king of East Francia. After his death in 936 AD, his son Otto becomes king of the German kingdom. In 951 AD, Otto marries a young lady named Adelaide. Now, she had been in distress because there was a guy down in Italy, King Berengar II of Italy. He had poisoned her husband and then tried to force her to marry his son so he could increase his territory. She said, you poison somebody's husband and it says, okay, he's gone. I want you to marry my boy.
Yeah.
Not going to do it. Yeah. She runs. He eventually finds her and incarcerates her in a dungeon. Then she escapes with her handmaiden, and she sends word to Otto, who was a lonely widower, from what I could understand. His wife had already passed. And she says, hey, I'll marry you if you come and rescue me. So Otto, man, he stops what he's doing, gets on his horse, and all his guys, they go down there. He cleans house, takes care of King Berengar, puts him in his place, and he marries Adelaide. In 955 AD, Otto defeats the Magyars at the Battle of Lichfield. He's outnumbered, great strategy. He beats them, and his fame and his territory increases. But one of the things that he did, and what we'll see, and this is kind of an aside here, is how during his time and even before that the clergy, they were starting to be really enriched and empowered. And one historian writes about the church at this time. He says, quote, the medieval church did not become a great territorial power reluctantly. It appreciated the blessings of receiving while teaching the blessedness of giving. So they like to teach about giving, and they like to receive.
Yeah.
And, even King Henry would come to the aid of a pope, as we'll see in a few minutes, and it would give power, more power and prestige to popes, but also he'd work an angle there for himself as well. But 961 AD, Otto responds to the plea for help from Pope John XII. He was being harassed by a foe in Italy. In response to Otto's help, the Pope crowns him emperor on February the 2nd, 962 AD. And Otto acknowledges the existence of the Papal States. So you have I need help maintaining the Papal States. And he said, okay, you're going to get it. I'm acknowledging, I'm helping you. But he also crowns Otto to be the emperor. And Adelaide is actually crowned empress, which was kind of unusual. She also got crowned as well. So you have the Pope crowns the monarch, and the monarch serves as the Pope's protectorate. However, under this arrangement, the Pope and the church bureaucracy came under the control of the new emperor. John XII, by the way, was a horrible pope. He would have critics castrated or their eyes gouged out. The Pope responds by opposing the emperor he had just crowned. So the Pope opposes Otto because now Otto says, you're going to do what I say, and he says, I don't want to.
Yeah.
So in response, Otto deposes John, declares that from this time forward that before a pope could take office, he must first swear allegiance to the emperor. So the Ottonians made the bishops their servile princes, and the popes also served at their pleasure. Now that's from Western Heritage, from a history book there. That's a quote. This arrangement is known as Caesaropapism. Now, the Ottonian rulers shifted their base of operation from Germany to Italy. So now you had the Germans kind of ruling the Holy Roman Empire, and they're telling the popes what to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the arrangement came into. Now, you go back a little bit before this happened. This is one of the reasons why the papacy was in such bad shape. 897 AD, we're going back now decades earlier, there was an infamous Cadaver Synod. We've talked about this on a previous podcast. Newly appointed Pope Stephen VI had the body of his predecessor, Pope Formosa, exhumed and dressed and put on trial for violating church law. The dead man's bones are found guilty. I mean, they dress him up and everything. They find him guilty. They cut off 3 of his fingers on his right hand, and he's stripped of his pope clothes.
Yeah.
And then he's thrown into the Tiber River. About a year later, supporters of the deceased Pope Formosa has the current Pope Stephen VI strangled.
Yeah.
So, you're having some issues with the popes.
Yeah.
And so what happens is they say between 880 AD and 990 AD, it was a tremendously bad stretch of popes. Since the fall of the Carolingian dynasty, the papacy would come under the control of some of the local Italian families. This time, in which it was a time in which a bunch of immoral women, about 2 or 3 of them, ruled the papacy, one in particular. But it was called Saeculum Obscurum, the Dark Century. Now, one lady more than any others had a very devastating effect upon the papacy. Her name was Marozia. She was born in 890 AD. She died in 930 AD. At the age of 15 years old, she becomes the mistress of Pope Sergius III. And he was also a distant relative.
Yeah.
Now, this is how intertwined she gets with the papacy. She was related to 7 popes.
And this is the same Catholic Church at this point that had already, for a long time now, forbidden priests from having wives.
Oh,
right?
yeah, but the popes were players.
But the popes got to be players.
They were players.
In the midst of it.
They were players, man.
So it was very much, well, you're not allowed to have it, but I'm going to do it anyway.
They'd have children, all kinds of stuff. So you had Sergius III is her lover and distant relative. John XI is her son. John XII and Benedict VII are her grandsons. Benedict VIII and John XIX are her great-grandsons. And Benedict IX is her great-great-grandson. Also, this same lady, she was responsible for the death of John X. Her and her new husband had hacked his brother to death in front of him, and then a little later they smothered him with a pillow.
Man, these popes and people make me think, I can't remember what movie it is, maybe you'll remember this, but it might be the Three Musketeers. It's a movie that has Tim Curry playing as this evil cardinal.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be the Three Musketeers.
I'm thinking it's the Three Musketeers movie. I think it's a Disney movie, but it's not a cartoon. It's a live action.
Right, I know which movie you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? But these guys you're talking about, it's like that. It's like Tim Curry playing that evil, like hypocritical evil cardinal. Like
yes.
As bad as he was in that movie, it's like these guys were in real life were just that bad or worse.
The papacy had a lot of money. They had land. They had power.
Yeah.
And they had influence over a lot of rulers.
Yeah.
And so it was a position that a lot of people aspired to acquire.
Yeah.
And they would do so by whatever means.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, once they did get the power and the position, they didn't want to let it go.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of intrigue there. Now, I want to tell you about probably the worst pope ever.
Okay.
His name was John the 12th. He was made pope when he was at the tender age of 18.
The tender age of 18.
18 years old, yes. And they say he ran the Lateran Palace, which I think was a forerunner of the Vatican. He ran it like a frat house. Now, his confessor and him had a disagreement, so he had his eyes gouged out.
Much gouging.
They like to go for the eyes.
Yeah.
I would have had to wear some goggles or something.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we've read about so many people getting their eyes gouged out. I would have definitely, maybe goggles.
That must be why they invented goggles to begin with.
Yes, a Catholic pair of goggles. Yeah. For your next church visit, try these goggles. Seeing the Pope today? How about these goggles? But there was a cardinal who disagreed with him. So, when you disagree with the cardinal, what do you do to him? You castrate him.
Okay. It's either that or gouge the eyes out.
A or B, Yeah. Can I have another choice? And this guy was also chronically sexually immoral. He was so immoral, and he was just a despicable guy. He died by defenestration. Now, I was amazed the other night when I mentioned that, and Paul, you actually knew what it meant to die by defenestration.
Yes.
What is it?
It means you're thrown out of a window.
He died by getting thrown out of a window. A husband came home, and he was there with his wife, and he throws him out the window. Now, some people say, well, he died of a heart attack, he died of a stroke. Well, all the above.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of stuff might happen to you if you get thrown out of a window.
Yes. So, but this guy was so bad. I read one place where they said when he made the Pope, when he first became Pope, he toasted the devil.
Yeah, that's got to be a red flag right there.
And you should have known right off the bat.
Right off the bat, you're toasting the devil.
Maybe we've made a bad choice here.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't quite the guy we wanted.
John the 12th, not a good man.
Toasting the devil.
Toasting the devil, but then gets thrown out of a window.
Yeah.
That's
it's a little easier for me to remember. For whatever reason, the German word for window is Fenster.
Fenster. Okay.
So defenestration. I don't know. Makes me think of.
So did you just pull that out of your head? When you figured it out?
I just knew it, yeah. Oh. I learned that in school.
Have you ever been thrown out of a window or something, Paul?
Thankfully not, no.
That's good.
I might not be the man you see today if I'd been thrown out of a window.
You wouldn't be here, would you?
No, I might not be here.
That's good. Don't ever get in a situation where somebody would have to throw you out of a window.
I try not to.
Yeah.
I avoid windows.
Live a life free of defenestration. All right. Now I want to before we leave, I want to talk about the monastery at Cluny. In 910 A.D. in eastern France, there's this guy, Duke of William of Aquitaine. He puts up a bunch of money for a monastery that they're going to build in Cluny, which is in France. There's a serious need for monastic reform, as you could imagine. Many had been corrupted by secular control. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to have a monastery that instead of being under the local control of some unethical bishops, William desired a monastery that would be under the direct control of the Pope, like he's any better.
Yeah.
I don't think, that's why I say, I don't think a lot of these people knew during that day how bad the papacy was.
How could they know?
I mean, you didn't have internet, you didn't have TV, you didn't have radio.
I mean, even with radio, TV, and internet, a lot of stuff is kept from us, right?
Yeah.
We don't really know a lot of the people in power, what are they really like behind closed doors?
Yeah, and you read stuff like this, you think, well, these guys probably thought, well, these local bishops, they're terrible, but the Pope, now that's a good man.
Yeah. Well, that's what they would have been taught to believe. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, the Clooney model produced monasteries that would answer to the Pope. They would follow the rule of Benedict, and they wanted to make sure that the priests abstained from marriage, and they wanted to have some separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the Clooney movement. It became really big.
They obviously weren't reading their Bibles even at all, because there is a place in the Bible where it specifically calls forbidding marriage a doctrine of demons.
Yeah,
they weren't reading the Bible.
If you don't have marriage, you're not going to have any little popes.
No.
Or any little bishops in the future.
No. And all you're going to do is lay a burden of temptation on a man for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
That's right.
I mean...
the Bible clearly says it's better to marry than to burn with passion.
Yeah.
And here they were making it where they're priests. And you see this situation with a lot of... the situation with the priesthood nowadays with some of this stuff, and you're like,
But what did Jesus say to the Pharisees? You lay heavy burdens on men, and then you don't lift them with a little finger, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what these popes were doing.
Yeah.
They were having mistresses, doing all sorts of adulteries, but then laying the burden on the lowlier priests.
Yeah.
They better not do any of this stuff, or they'll probably get burned at the stake or something, right?
Yeah. It was terribly hypocritical, and it was just a bad situation.
It was a bad time for the church.
It was a very bad time for the church, and you read it and you're like, oh my goodness, how in the world did the church make it through this time?
Yeah.
And I think you're going to have some things that are happening in the next few centuries that will kind of wake some people up.
Yeah.
And which always kind of happens. Well, Paul, that's the 9th and 10th century. There's not a lot of good. Other than the way, I think one of the things that amazes me the most is how they dealt with the pagans, where they would make deals with them, be it with the Vikings, be it with Grotham or Rollo, or with Vladimir,
Athelstan
over in Kiev. And you can have this land, or I can send you these troops, but you're going to have to become a Christian. And
I don't have a problem with it, to be honest. I mean, it's even if their conversion is forced and fake. Like, now, I have a problem with obviously putting people to death or whatever. Yeah. That I don't support that, obviously. Right. But just if you're saying you can marry someone or you can have this title, but you have to convert to Christianity, what's the harm in that? Are they going to really be better off staying pagans? No.
Yeah.
So I mean, and it'll. This is, you're even a watered down version of Christianity is a mile and a half better than paganism.
Yeah, all these people are like, well, cultural Christianity is bad, which is not good.
Cultural Christianity won't save you.
But when you see what's happening in our culture nowadays, the rampant immorality and encouraging kids to get sex changes at age 8. And, I mean, just lunacy. And these people that want men to go in women's bathrooms and you be okay about it. Yeah. And if you say it's wrong, then you're a terrible person. I mean, I would rather have cultural Christianity.
Yeah.
And let's work with that and get some things straightened out than have this rampant
The problem is you can't just manufacture cultural Christianity. That's the problem. If you could just manufacture it, that'd be great. But you can't. It has to be a side effect of real Christianity.
That's exactly right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
For there to be cultural Christianity means that there has to be some...
There has to be some real Christianity going around. Yeah.
All right. That's good. Paul, you just bring it, man. I mean, it's over. Forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we want to thank y'all for being with us on this edition of the Uncensored Pilgrims. And as always, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the Uncensored Pilgrims. And we need to let you know that the views that we express on this podcast belong to Marty McLain and Paul Price. They are our views. They do not reflect the views of anyone else. And with that said, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.